Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Haley Panagakis, an editor here at Connect, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features you can use. You can type in your questions for Larissa in the comment box on the left-hand side of your screen. Please submit your questions and comments at the end of the webinar. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, so if you could hold off on those until then. A recorded version of this session will be available on demand on our website. And if you have any questions about obtaining your certificate of attendance, please contact me at hpanagakis@connectmeetings.com. I'll share more information about that at the end of the program, but we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank Visit Lex for making today's presentation possible. They provided a quick video today to showcase their destination, and I'm going to bring that up right now. So thanks again to Visit Lex, and a few added details about that destination. Visit Lex is ideal for groups of all sizes, anywhere from 50 to up to 5,200 people. With more than 7,900 hotel rooms, 18 direct flights to Bluegrass Airport, and 11 convention hotels located within 15 minutes of the convention center, as well as venues like Rupp Arena and the 900-seat Opera House, Lexington, Kentucky is the perfect spot for your next meeting. You can meet Visit Lex at Connect Marketplace. They'll be on site August 25th through 27th in Grapevine, Texas. To learn more about the destination, they'll have a booth set up near the VIP lounge during a marketplace appointments, which is located between halls C and D. Stop by to sample local Lexington treats and meet with Marcy Kruger, Vice President of Sales and Services at Visit Lex. Thanks again, Visit Lex, for sponsoring today's webinar. And now it's my privilege to introduce today's speaker, Larissa Schultz. Larissa J. Schultz, CMP-MHA, is an advocate of continuing to grow through learning and forward momentum. She has been actively involved in the meeting management industry for over 19 years and is the founder and owner of LJS Meeting Strategies, a meeting management, training, and consulting company based out of the Los Angeles area. Her background and experience as a meeting planner includes working with corporations and associations, planning both domestic and international conferences and meetings. She has been an active member of MPI for over 18 years and is a past president of the Southern California Chapter Board of Directors. Larissa has presented at a multitude of industry conventions, congresses, webinars, and conferences around the country. She is also an adjunct professor at Glendale Community College, teaching in the hospitality and tourism program. 3 things she believes in are laughter, a good glass of wine, and trusting your own instincts. So Larissa, thank you for speaking with us today. We really appreciate it. And whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Haley, very much, and thank you to everybody who has joined us today. Haley, if you could do me a favor and access the slides. At this point, they're not showing up on my screen. Perfect. That is great. Again, thank you to everybody who has joined us today. We are going to go through a lot of information in this little under an hour that we have. I want to let you all know that after the session is over, we will do some Q&A at the end, and then we're also going to send you a copy of the slides, which you can utilize as a reference tool and keep on file in advance. There's going to be some links to some websites that you can access, so I want to make sure all of you get this information. Before we move forward, I do want to make a comment and point out that this webinar has been created and is presented from the American perspective on culture. Since, as we will find out in this webinar, all cultures are uniquely different, it is important to understand the perspective from which this presentation was created. Also, I want to let you know that this information is provided as informational only, and if you do require expert assistance in this area, I highly recommend you hire a professional. So, let's talk about the word culture. Now, the word culture stems from a Latin root that means tilling of the soil. In many modern languages, the word is used in a figurative sense with two meanings. The first most common meaning is civilization, which includes education, manners, arts and crafts, and their products. The second meaning, and what we're going to be focusing on in this session, refers to the way that people think, feel, and act. It is the attitudes and behavior characteristics of a particular social group. It is their shared values and beliefs. So a social group can refer to nations. It can refer to regions within or across nations. It can refer to ethnicities, religions, occupations, organizations, or even the genders. Each of these is a social group that has its own characteristics of attitudes and behaviors. For example, the social group of this organization likes to wear head ties around their foreheads. Now, some of the things that culture is not, and this is very important that we discuss this. First and foremost, culture is not right or wrong. There are no cultural absolutes. Culture is also the collective group, not necessarily individual behavior. You can definitely have individuals within certain cultures who may not agree with the shared values or beliefs. And lastly, culture is something that is learned. It is not inherited. You are not born knowing the culture. You are taught it along the way. Culture is essentially what makes us all different. People of different cultures, different social groups, share basic concepts, but may view them from different angles and different perspectives. I want to talk about a man named Richard Lewis, and some of you may have heard of him before, and some of you may have seen this Lewis model. Lewis opened the Berlitz language schools in the 1950s and also spent 5 years living in Japan as a tutor to an empress. Following this, he opened up an executive language school in England, which offers intensive English language learning for corporate executives. Now, over the years, Lewis has conducted extensive research and study in the areas of culture, in the differences as well as the similarities of the cultures. He is the author of a great book called When Cultures Collide and is the creator of the Lewis model of culture. And what you're looking at on this slide is the Lewis model of culture. Now, this model was designed to show that there are three main types of culture in the world. There are linear active cultures, there are reactive cultures, and there are multi-active cultures. The research Lewis did on the varying countries and cultures focused on where those countries landed within the multi-active, linear active, and reactive categories. And then he listed them on the charts, looking at various aspects of their cultures based on communication style, listening habits, leadership, negotiation styles, what the cultures valued, their concepts of space as well as time, what the dominant religions were in the cultures, motivation factors, and manners and taboos. Now, the Lewis model is actually what the Culture Active tool is based on, and this is a tool that I will share with you later. It is a great online resource that I want to make sure that you have access to, and so I'll have information for you at the end of this webinar on that. So why do manners matter? Well, Manners are a code of behavior. They are the right, wrong, proper, improper, what is respectful, what is not in society. Manners are so important to our various societies that children learn the societal standards through books and practice. So much so that Dora the Explorer's Book of Manners has been printed in several languages, including Spanish, Greek, and Mandarin. Now, I want to reemphasize that these are things that we learn. Again, we are not born with these manners. We don't know them from birth. We learn them to the point that they become so ingrained in us that when we see bad manners in others, it makes us uncomfortable. And when I say bad manners, I use that in air quotes. Now, the title of this session is Why Manners Matter, a discussion on the lack of international etiquette. So why is there a lack of international etiquette? Well, according to Richard Lewis, the reason why there is a lack is because it actually doesn't exist. Because manners are learned, and they are learned by cultures, we as individuals then formulate for ourselves what is correct behavior based on our culture. And then what happens is when we start to interact with other cultures, we see their behavior and may make the assumption that they have bad manners or their manners are not correct. Each of us has a bias to the point that we cannot agree on universal manners and behaviors. Now, the wise people of HSBC, which is a global financial organization, created a series of ads that are very focused on the differences of other cultures. And they provide, in my opinion, a very good overview of what we were talking about. Haley, can you please show these videos? I have two videos that I want to show you to help give examples of what we're talking about. And if you can play the second video, Haley. All right, thank you very much. So what we saw there was two videos that showed different cultures interacting with each other. Now, in any cross-cultural situation, there is always what I call the honeymoon phase, when we think the other is just being so cute or just being so like them. And this stems from some of the generalities that we've all learned on other cultures. And again, they are very general. However, what this does is when you interact with these cultures, it creates a type of euphoria when you first come in connection with the other cultures. For example, the American habit of taking up large amounts of space in rooms, sitting at tables, sprawling out at airports, when first seen by the Germans, it's somewhat disconcerting, but since the interaction is short-lived, it's also forgivable. Another example might be the Latin sense of time, which can send those from Sweden and Finland off the edge, but generally, again, it's forgiven the first time it happens as it's understood that it would happen. However, when you're conducting business on a larger level and over a longer amount of time, this honeymoon phase starts to disappear, as pretty much in any relationship. And it's very important that the individual is willing to take on and participate in the other culture's manners, particularly if you're traveling in a country where you're going to come in contact with a lot of strangers. Now, since there's so much to learn about other cultures, there are actually going to be a few key areas where we're going to focus on in this webinar. Again, I will give you some tools that you can further your education and research in this area. But for today's webinar, I want to talk about these key areas: dining etiquette, small talk, personal space, societal norms, cultural taboos, and nonverbal communication. So let's get started, and we're going to start with dining etiquette. Now, dining is a general business custom across all cultures. Many business meetings are held over meals, and meals are also a great way to find common ground with one another. However, the differences in cultures can work against that process if you aren't educated in another culture's dining etiquette. For example, knowing when to begin the meal is a crucial component of culture. For example, in my house, my husband does not start eating his meal until I have taken a bite of mine. It was how he was raised in his culture, and the same goes for many other households. The meal may begin after a prayer, after a toast. When the senior-aged individual at the table begins, then the rest of the individuals may eat, or when certain phrases are conducted, like bon appetit. Make sure that you understand when working with other cultures that if you're going to be dining with them, you don't just start devouring your meal when it arrives, and you understand what is the norm in that culture. One other is number of courses served. Now, each culture has standards of courses served. In America, the standard is 3 courses. France, there are many side dishes served separately. And in Japan, you can actually lose track of the number of dishes served. Knowing how many dishes you may be expected can definitely help you balance your intake during the meal process, as well as knowing if you should clear your plate or not, per the HSBC video we saw. Paying the bills and tipping. It is customary to pay when you are hosting on your home ground. However, if you are traveling to a foreign country to meet with clients, you may wish to take them out to dine. In any case, it is the person offering the invitation who pays, in general, except in Asian countries where their sense of hospitality is so far-reaching that they will insist on paying. It is okay for you to invite them and pay, but the general rule is that they have to at least entertain you out once before you can return the favor. Also, when it comes to tipping in foreign countries, it will vary by country, and it's best to either study in advance the tipping policy or ask your local national host what is customary. Another area for dining etiquette is the hours that individuals eat. Cultures eat at different times. For example, those in the countries of Norway, Finland, and Sweden wake up very early and begin work very early. They eat a small breakfast and are hungry by noontime, which generally means their evening meal comes before 7 p.m. In contrast, if you are in Spain, your midday meal will actually begin at about 2 p.m., thus making your evening meal no earlier than 8 p.m., sometimes with the main course coming to the table at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. Understanding meal times is especially important when you're traveling to other countries, and it can assist you in ensuring you aren't starving before the meal begins and that you aren't making dinner reservations with your clients in an empty restaurant. And lastly, dining customs. How people eat is just as important as when they eat. For example, in Japan, as well as other Polynesian countries, you may not sit on chairs, but instead on mats or hard grass or soil. Chopsticks are used in Japan and China, and in India, you eat with your hands, but only your right hand, unless you have informed the host you are left-handed. In India, the left hand is considered dirty. So let's do a quick poll. So Haley, if you can bring up the poll. Based on Japanese culture, you should arrive 1 hour late for dinner. Is that a yes or a no, do you think? There's the poll. So click if you think yes or no. Based on Japanese culture, you should arrive 1 hour late for dinner. All right, just a few more seconds, and then we'll end the voting. Okay. So the answer to that is no. Exactly. Most of the people said no. Japanese are very, very punctual, and it is insulting in their culture if you show up late. So this slide is a great chopstick basics slide. Just as you learn to eat using technical aspects of the correct utensil, learning the customs of the other country is important. The key to remember if you do dine with chopsticks is to remember that, in essence, your chopsticks are like your fork in American culture. So you would never use your chopsticks to move plates, impale food that's shared by everybody, or lift food from service dishes. Just like you wouldn't point your fork at somebody, you would not point your chopsticks as people. You want to make sure you're not using chopsticks as toys or hair accessories. And it's actually an insult in the Japanese culture to rub your chopsticks together. Just some great little information. All right, how about another poll? In which culture should you put your food in your mouth with your fork tines facing down? A, Chinese culture, B, English culture, C, Japanese culture, or D, American culture? We'll have people vote. Looks like people are leaning towards English culture. A few seconds later. Okay, we'll stop the voting. The majority did say English culture, which is correct. It is the English culture. In the English culture, they eat continental style with the fork in the left hand and the knife in the right hand, with the fork tines facing down toward the plate. Unlike American culture, they don't switch hands with the fork. Once they cut a piece of knife or a piece of meat or a vegetable, they actually then just lift the fork into their mouth with the tines facing down and eat. In the American culture, sometimes we cut our meat or our vegetables, we put the knife down, switch the fork to our right hand, and then eat. So definitely different ways of eating in the different cultures. All right, just a couple more polls. Let's talk about the French culture. While dining in France, you should always praise the food that is served to you. Do you think that is yes or no? Again, while dining in France, you should always praise the food that is served to you. Yes or no? All right. All right, looks like the majority of people did vote yes on that, and that is the correct answer. You should not wait to be asked how the food is. You should definitely initiate that you think the food is quality. You should also politely let them know. You should not be ostentatious. You shouldn't be gushing and, going over the moon on it, but you should definitely let the host know and praise them for the food that they have cooked. All right, and the last one is in the Romanian culture. So while in Romania at a dinner party, when the host recorks the wine bottle, you should A, ask for another glass of wine, B, offer up the bottle you brought to share, C, leave the dinner party, or D, adjourn to the lounge for after-dinner cocktails. So which one do you think you should do when your host recorks the wine bottle in Romania? All right. So this is actually kind of a tricky one, and one of the reasons why we advise people to do some research. It looks like most of the people thought, the majority said adjourn to the lounge after dinner cocktails. However, the answer is you should actually leave the dinner party. In Romania, a host will not ask you to leave the dinner party. It would be uncouth of them to do. So what they will do is they will subtly recork the wine bottles to let you know that the event is over. So some additional global dining tips that are kind of important to point out are, let's say, in Italy. Don't end the evening in the dark pretty much means that Italians consider the cappuccino a day starter or a post-lunch pick-me-up. So ordering one after dinner shows that you don't necessarily know your local Java. Europe, hands are visible. In Europe, European etiquette requires you to keep both hands visible above the table at all times. Most diners prefer to rest their wrists on the table to do so. In Korea, if you are offered a drink by an elder, you are expected to accept it with both hands. So you would hold the glass in both hands. Once the drink is poured, you would actually turn away for a discreet sip as a sign of respect. In Chile, it would be uncouth to eat anything, even French fries, with the fingers. As Groucho Marx once said, fingers should always be eaten separately. So you should use a fork even when eating French fries. As mentioned before, in India and the Middle East and parts of Africa, the left hand is strongly associated with bathroom functions and hence perceived as soil. So generally it's recommended that you use your right hand when dining at the table, touching your plate, eating finger food, or passing the naan. It was mentioned in some previous sessions that I've done, well, what if I'm left-handed? The recommendation is that you let your host know in advance that you are left-handed to avoid any embarrassment. And lastly, in Russia, it's considered the height of rudeness to turn down an offer of vodka, even at breakfast. Vodka in Russia is always served neat, no ice, no mixture, and it is such an aspect of their culture that it's generally expected when you visit Russia as a guest that you will be drinking vodka. So let's move on from dining and talk about more general societal manners as they differ in different cultures. Now, I always like to use the phrase when in Rome, and it's the line for following what the others do. It's probably your most safe bet when you want to ensure that you're following the cultural norms. It doesn't necessarily supersede learning in advance some of those standards, and there does have to be a line drawn where you won't go and following all of their customs. For example, cattle stealing is very popular in African countries, and Japanese tend to apologize regularly, even for wrongs they have not done. So how much you choose to adapt that culture is going to be up to you, but I would say you're pretty safe on just kind of watching what your host is doing and ensuring that you're following the cultural norms. Now, some key areas that fall under societal manners are gift giving, which in various cultures does vary. Now, in the U.S., it can be perceived easily as bribery, whereas in other countries, it is a kind gesture showing interest in doing business. For example, U.S. companies sometimes have gift-giving policies or gift-receiving policies, and in other cultures, there are no such policies. Now, in a moment, I'm going to go through some slides where there's some specific countries that have unique and specific gift-giving processes. But before I do that, after I do that, I'm going to be touching on small talk, which is frequently seen at cocktail parties. We're going to also look at personal space, what is considered acceptable to some. And then lastly, we're going to talk about nonverbal communication. So, to give or not to give? Gift giving in Japan and China is very difficult as the extravagance with which the Asian gifts are giving do not meet most standard corporate American gift policies. For example, one of the companies I worked for, we had a gift receiving policy that if the gift was valued at over $25, we could not accept it. And it does create a dilemma on the receiving of gifts because if I did not receive a gift from my Japanese counterparts, or refused the gift, it was seen as insulting to them. So it was a challenge and something that we definitely had to work through with our legal department and our compliance department in the process. And in advance, if you tried to provide an extravagant gift to someone in Japan or China, it would only result in them gifting you something even more extravagant, creating an ongoing process. Now, any gifts you give, they should be ethnic and tasteful from your own country. For example, common quality gifts to give are prints, illustrated books, maybe of like Yellowstone National Park, ceramics, something from your own region. If you're from the South and barbecue is very popular there, maybe you would give a couple jars of barbecue sauce. And it's important that you're looking at something that's not too personal, but something that is definitely country-based. That you can give. One of the things to also note is you should never open gifts in front of Asians, as someone could be embarrassed by the process. So a lot of times when working with Asian cultures, you will receive the gift, but you won't open it in front of them. So for example, let's look at gift giving in China. Here is just some of the many different protocols for gift giving in China. You want to make sure that you have a good reason to give a gift, and you want to make sure that you have a witness. You should not give a gift in private with only one person. Business gifts should always be reciprocated. You never want to give cash. And in China, you don't want to be what's called an iron rooster, which is meaning being frugal. And you also want to make sure that you avoid giving one of something. Give in pairs, because the Chinese philosophy focuses on harmony and balance. Gift giving in Japan. This is a central part of Japanese business etiquette, and if anybody has worked with the Japanese culture, you already understand this process. You want to make sure, though, if you're traveling to Japan, that you actually bring a range of gifts for your trips. You may be giving gifts to different levels of people, whether it's senior levels, junior levels, etc. And so you want to make sure that you have different ranges of gifts, because you don't want to be seen giving the exact same gift to the different levels of people. The emphasis is actually on the act of the gift giving, not the gift itself. The whole gift giving process is actually very ceremonial, and it is a big process of the culture in Japan. Expensive gifts are very common, and the best time in Japan to present the gift is at the end of the trip. A gift for an individual should be in private. You should never give an individual gift in front of a group of people. Gifts to the groups, all members of that group should be present. And you want to make sure that you're presenting and receiving gifts with both hands. And kind of going back to the dinner and who's going to be paying for dinner, you want to make sure that before accepting a gift, you refuse at least once or twice, because you don't want to seem too greedy. And also in Japan, they have some different factors when it comes to numbers you should be aware of, and numbers 4 and 9 are unlucky. So you want to make sure to avoid any gifts with 4 or 9 in them, and you want to give in pairs if possible. Now, gift giving Saudi Arabia. Gifts should only be given to intimate friends in Saudi Arabia. You don't give to strangers. Gifts should be of the highest quality. Silver is acceptable in this country. Never buy gold or silk as a present for men. Always give and receive gifts with the right hand. And it is okay in Saudi Arabia to open gifts when received. So as you can see, based on those 3 different countries that we talked about, actually 4 different countries that we talked about, it's different in each one. So you want to make sure that before traveling to the country or before receiving clients or business colleagues from those countries, that you understand what their cultural norm is when it comes to gift giving. Now let's talk about small talk, or what I call idle chat. Small talk is seen frequently at cocktail parties, and for some cultures it can be very challenging. Americans, Australians, Canadians definitely seem to have cornered the market on small talk, whereas other cultures like Germans think small talk is an absolute waste of time. Japanese are somewhat frightened by it and would rather just have conversations with colleagues and people they already know. Similar to that is Russians, who would rather have deep conversations with their comrades and those close to them. Latin American and South American cultures can talk endlessly about anything and everything for many, many hours. They tend to be very inquisitive cultures and have very strong opinions on various topics. I once held a dinner event in Brazil where we had an educational component followed by a reception, and the educational component wrapped up at about 9. The reception started at 9 and went till about 11. At that point, we had run out of alcohol, we had run out of food, and at 1 in the morning, without any food or any alcohol, there was probably a group of about 75 people still just standing around, talking, having the best time possible. So it's one of those things that you want to be aware of, and make sure that if you want to provide food and beverage, even though we didn't seem to need to, you may want to factor that into your planning process. Now, one of the best ways that I like to look at who likes small talk and who doesn't is you really want to look at your coconuts and your peaches. Now, coconuts are those individuals who are hard to crack. And this can be people you know in the American culture. It doesn't necessarily have to be from other cultures, but those are the individuals who are kind of hard to crack. But once you're able to get into that shell, you are welcome with the soft interior of the coconut, where they're very cordial, very friendly, very happy. Whereas you have those people, and I know some of us have seen it, and I think a lot of people in the hospitality industry are these people. We're peaches, right? We are soft right from the get-go. We're enjoying each other's company. We're happy to see each other. Because of this, coconuts and peaches view each other differently. So coconuts may see peaches as superficial or hypocritical. Coconuts may think peaches are just too friendly, and so therefore they have a hidden agenda. And then coconuts may also think that peaches aren't following through on their initial friendliness. They seem so happy to see me, but then they went off and started talking to someone else instead of standing and talking to me. Whereas in the other side, peaches might see coconuts as cold, emotionally distant, unsocial. They might be arrogant or snobbish. Peaches also might see coconuts as hostile or unfriendly. So it's important to know in working with other cultures or just other people in networking organizations, maybe you're talking to a coconut, and maybe it's going to take you a little bit of time if you're a peach to kind of get through that shell. And if you are a coconut, maybe you need to understand that peaches are just soft right from the get-go. Factor that into the approach when you approach people. Let's also talk about personal space. Personal space is something that occurs especially at cocktail parties. When it comes to personal space, there's actually a basic design of where we have our intimate space versus where we feel everybody else should be. If anybody saw the movie Dirty Dancing, my dance space versus your dance space, that happens when it comes to social interactions at cocktail parties. So what we have here is kind of a scale of what intimate space is. It's about 1.5 feet from yourself. Then you move into personal space, which is within that 1.5 to 4 feet of yourself. Then you have your social space, and then you have your public space. And when we look at the Lewis model of culture and we look at where these cultures sit on the spectrum, we find that a lot of the multi-active cultures, so those are your Italians, those are your Latin American cultures, those are your South American cultures, those cultures are very, very comfortable being really within that personal space. They respect the intimate space aspect, but they are very comfortable being within that personal space, and so they will be very close to you, talking and interacting with you. Now, the linear active people, which are more your Germans, the Swedish, even U.S. citizens, tend to walk the fine line between the personal space and the social space. They don't want to seem too distant outside that, so within the middle of the social space, but they also want to respect your personal space. And then your reactive cultures, which are the more Asian cultures, Japanese, Koreans, they're much more comfortable being within the social space. So things to factor when it comes to working with other cultures, how close you get to the cultures, the space you're talking in. Some people may back off from you just because it's uncomfortable for them to be talking that close to another individual. Okay, so let's talk about some body language. Depending on what you read, 86% to 93% of the way we communicate is actually through nonverbal communication. My husband says that I talk a lot with my eyes and not with my mouth, which I think is a good thing, but I'm just not sure. I think he's saying I tend to roll my eyes a lot. So eye contact, hand gestures, body and posture. Your tone of your voice is actually a nonverbal because it's not words being used, it's more of a sound being used. The tone of your voice is considered nonverbal communication. Your facial expression and how much space you give people and if you're touching them or not. Those are all aspects of the nonverbal communication. And it's a lot of times how we act says a lot more than what we're saying. Now, showing the bottom of your shoe in an Arab country is considered offensive. The peace sign, if you all hold up the peace sign in America with your palm facing out, is okay. But actually, if you turn that peace sign around and your palm is facing towards you, you have just told the British people in England to take a flying leap if you do that to them. So even something as simple as that makes a big difference. Russians think it is bad form to stand with your hands in your pockets, but they also think it's perfectly acceptable to walk around hotel hallways in pajamas. Indonesians, when passing someone noticeably or knowingly older than themselves, actually crouch in respect to them being elder, as it is taboo in the Indonesian culture to be higher than a senior person as you're walking by them. Now, to be safe, be aware of yourself. Make sure you read through the cultural taboos of the country you may be visiting, especially when it comes to body language. What I try to do when traveling to other cultures is try to minimize, especially my hand gestures, minimize those and try to focus more on how my physical being is, how much space I'm giving to people, and utilizing my words more than my hand gestures. Now, moving forward, being well-mannered in your own country and being well-versed in the manners of other countries you are working with is invaluable to your business success. So what can you do to find success? Well, number one, tolerance is very important. Understanding that not everyone wants to be chatty. Not everybody wants to be a peach. Or maybe put off by your invasion of their personal space is something that we can all tolerate if we understand where it is coming from. If we can tolerate each other a little bit more, we have a better advantage of getting along. You want to make sure that you're understanding of other cultures. You want to make sure that you take time to learn about other cultures, especially if you're traveling there or hosting them. You want to focus on key areas where you're going to be interacting with them in business. For example, if you're going to be dining with them, if you know there will be gift giving involved, you want to make sure that you understand that process. On the next slide, I have some additional websites and tools that I will show you, which I'll explain. The other thing is you want to be aware of yourself in cross-cultural situations. What are your tendencies? What behaviors do you may have that might be offensive in the culture you are going to or working with? Again, when in Rome is the line for following what others are doing, and in most cases is your safest way to ensure you are following cultural norms. Again, it doesn't supersede learning in advance some standards. Cultural diversity is not something that is going to go away. A working knowledge of the basic traits of other cultures, as well as our own, will minimize unpleasant surprises, give us insights in advance, and enable us to interact successfully with nationalities with whom we previously had difficulty. Now, here are some tools and education opportunities that I want to provide you. These might be helpful in achieving certain things. So crossculture.com is actually Richard Lewis's website. And on crossculture.com, he has access and information about all the different cultures that are out there. When it comes to negotiating with them, when it comes to holding meetings with them, when it comes to dining with them, when it comes to how they view leadership standards. It's a great tool. And then also the Hofstede Center, Geert Hofstede actually did a lot of the research before Richard Lewis came on the scene. And Richard Lewis's work grew from what Geert Hofstede had already put together. So the Hofstede Center, geerthofstede.com, actually has some great tools in addition to cross-culture. And then finally, the Culture Active tool that I mentioned, which is really based on the Lewis model. Now, the Culture Active tool is an online tool that you can log on to. You can get a password, log on to it, and you can actually do a self-assessment. So I think it's about an hour self-assessment. It asks you a bunch of questions about yourself, how you view things, what your listening habits are, what your communication style is, your negotiation styles. And then it computes that information. And then what that self-assessment does is it can provide you the tool to compare yourself to other cultures to see where you might have successes with other cultures and where you might have challenges, and helps you focus on things you can look at. I utilize the Culture Active tool regularly when I'm conducting international business, and honestly, on a personal level, I use it when I'm traveling for personal trips, just to kind of learn a little bit more about the culture and where I'm going. So at this time, I wanted to open up the presentation. Since there was kind of a lot of information in a short period of time, I wanted to open up the presentation to any questions that may have come in.
Hey, Larissa, I've been watching, and we haven't gotten any questions so far. We have gotten some questions about not being able to see the video and some technical issues. I'll just note that if you did have any issues with video, I will provide all the video links on our email that's going out tomorrow. And also the resource links that you just were talking about, I'll add that to the email as well if anybody missed those. Carla Marshall from Dallas is asking, will this be available on recording? Yes, this will be available on demand, and you can watch it from our website. Shelley Callahan says, in Russia, you say it's customary to drink vodka. What if you are not a drinker?
That is a great question. There's a couple ways that you can approach that. In Russia, if you are in Russia or working with Russian colleagues who want to drink, you can let your host know in advance that you are not a drinker. But what you may still do is you may accept the toast, be part of the toast, but not drink it. Because there are people who don't drink and it's becoming more accepted globally, it's okay as long as you let people know in advance, but you still want to participate somehow in the celebratory aspect of it.
We're getting some questions about the website links. Again, I will provide those links in a follow-up email for anybody who attended. We've also got some questions in regard to a key code on one of the websites. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not necessarily familiar with the word key code for the Culture Active website. What I would recommend is if there's a contact for that website that you can connect with them or a help page, maybe they can help you obtain that information. Another way to get to the Culture Active tool is through Richard Lewis's website, thecrossculture.com. So maybe you want to access it from that point.
Michelle Smith from British Columbia says, how do you deal with large conferences and gift giving in Asian countries?
I'm going to assume this means attending large conferences. If you're the planner of the conference, generally your gift giving is conducted with the host that you're working with, whether it's the venue host or maybe you're working with a corporation over there putting on a meeting. It really is going to depend on the situation. So, for example, when I held a meeting in South Korea, the gifts that I brought were specific to the hotel venue and the salesperson and my convention services person that I was working with. So we did gifts exchanging from that aspect. My clients, because there was a host committee in Korea, their gift giving was really specific to the client host committee aspect of things. So it really depends on who you're working with and what your role is in the conference.
Sandra Sears from Atlanta says, when giving gifts, do you usually bring a gift from your country or a gift purchase in the host country you are in or are going to?
Generally, you would. That's a great question. Generally, you would give a gift from the country you're from. A lot of what I found globally, a lot of people love gifts if you're from the U.S., specifically since you're from Atlanta, Georgia. You want to give something that is not too personal, but also shows an aspect of the country. So picture books on national parks, photos, postcards, candies or chocolates that are specific to your region. I mentioned barbecue sauce if you're from the South. Key lime cookies are good if you're from Florida. Those types of things, just something that kind of represents where you're from is a nice gift to give.
That's all the questions we've gotten in so far. I have a question. You didn't really mention the Middle East much. Do you have any recommendations if anybody's visiting the Middle East?
I did talk about gift giving with Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
I would say that one of the best things that you want to do is look at the Culture Active tool. Check out Richard Lewis's information on Cross Culture. It's a great tool. You know, when you think about it, there are so many countries in the world. We're not going to be able to cover them all within the webinar, but I would definitely utilize the Culture Active tool or the crossculture.com. You can also order Richard Lewis's book. It's a very thick book because he actually goes through all the individual countries within the world.
Okay. Blair Gansman from New York says, in regard to booking events internationally, I've booked several events where the venue does not contract with their clients. How do you recommend making sure that these venues actually hold true to their booking?
Blair, that's a great question. One of the other things that I do talk about outside of etiquette is negotiations and contracting. A lot of countries look at the process differently. We in America are a very litigious society, so therefore we are very much about having a contract in place, having all the clauses laid out, having addendums in place. And when working with other countries, they don't necessarily look at it that way. They sometimes may consider an email, and if they emailed back saying, yes, we have the space, that's kind of their way of saying it's a contract. Now, what I have found successful is having a contract template that I send them and actually ask them to sign, just based on the fact that I stand behind the fact my clients need it, my organization requires it, it's part of what we do, and since we're an American-based company, we need to have this contract in place. So the best thing to do is if they don't have a contract, you would present the contract to them and have them sign it. The only other thing I can recommend is that you're constantly reconfirming with them on the space.
Wendy from San Carlos, California says, what about gifting alcohol? For those of us in California, we have wine.
I live in California too, and I do enjoy our wine. Gifting alcohol, again, Middle East countries, actually, as Haley mentioned, may not be appropriate for gifting wine. So again, you want to find out if it's appropriate. Japanese cultures, a lot of Japanese culture people in Japan do enjoy receiving wine, especially California wines, as a gift. You want to be careful. I don't know if I would necessarily provide California wines to France because they do have their own collections of fabulous wines. So again, it's one of those that you want to do a little bit of research in advance to find out if alcohol is taboo as a gift or if it's accepted as a gift.
Looks like that's all the questions that we're having so far. Do you have any resources that you use for like dress code, finding like the best resource to find like what to wear when you're out?
In the different countries?
Yeah.
Actually, and I know I keep referring to this, but actually the Culture Active tool is a great resource for that. Richard Lewis's website is a great resource for that too. There's a lot of different tools out there that you can find on what's acceptable dress code in the various countries.
Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions, so I can go ahead and close out if you're ready for that, Larissa.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. I just do want to say thank everybody for their time and their attention to this, and I wish them all the best in cross-cultural communications and work that they do.
Thank you, Larissa. I really appreciate it. Everyone, you can see Larissa speak in person at our annual Connect Marketplace show. These are all of Larissa's references if you're curious on all of that. Yeah, you can see Larissa speaking in person at Connect Marketplace, which is happening August 25th through 27th in Grapevine, Texas. Visit connectmarketplace.com or contact Michael Vada at mvada@connectmeetings.com to learn more about Connect Marketplace and our upcoming shows listed on your screen, and we have more coming up in 2017 if you'd like to hear more about those. You can learn about Connect's past and upcoming webinars on all of our websites, which are listed on your screen. If you have any questions or to inquire about a certificate of attendance for this session, please email me at hpanagakis@connectmeetings.com. Please note that we'll be sending out an email tomorrow with a downloadable certificate for anyone attending live. And if you watched any webinars in the past and are in need of a certificate, I'll be sending out some emails today. If you don't get anything from me, definitely contact me tomorrow. Thanks again to everyone for attending, and we hope you'll join us on September 20th for Stress is Optional, 5 Keys to Making This Your Best Week Ever, presented by another Connect Marketplace speaker, Adam Tim, and sponsored by Visit Richmond, Virginia. Please don't forget to add us on social, listed on your screen now. And thank you all for joining us today. I hope you all have a great day.